The Song of the Lost Siren. Chapter 1. The Song That Haunts. Dorian stood at the helm of his weather-beaten ship, his hand gripping the wheel as he stared into the misty horizon. His tall, lean frame was draped in a long coat, once navy blue, but now faded and torn from years of wear. His boots were scuffed, the soles patched multiple times, and his shirt, though tucked in neatly, bore the signs of salt and sweat. His short black hair clung to his forehead, damp from the spray of the sea, and his angular jaw was shadowed with stubble. But it was his eyes, stormy grey and piercing, that told his story, a sailor who had seen far more than he cared to admit. The haunting melody drifted on the breeze again, and Dorian's brow furrowed. The song called to something deep inside him, pulling at memories he couldn't quite place. "Captain," called Arlen, his first mate, from behind. A stocky man with broad shoulders and a weathered face, Arlen looked uneasy. "We've been chasing that cursed song for days. Whatever's singing it, it ain't human." Dorian turned, his coat billowing in the wind. Human or not, someone out there needs help. Arlen frowned, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "Or they're leading us straight to our graves." Chapter 2. The Shipwreck. The storm hit without warning. Waves rose like mountains, and the wind howled like a beast unleashed. Dorian fought the wheel, his coat plastered to his body as rain lashed at his face. "Secure the lines!" he bellowed, his voice barely audible over the crashing waves. Arlen scrambled to obey, but the ship groaned under the strain. Dorian caught a glimpse of a figure on the rocks, a woman with long silver hair that shimmered even through the storm. "Do you see her?" he shouted to Arlen. "There's nothing there!" Arlen yelled back, his voice edged with panic. Before Dorian could respond, the ship collided with the jagged reef. The impact threw him into the icy water, and the last thing he saw was the figure on the rocks, her aquamarine eyes glowing softly in the dark. Chapter 3. Eyes of the Siren. Dorian woke on a secluded beach, his body aching and his clothes torn. He coughed, spitting out sand and seawater, and pushed himself to his knees. His coat was gone, his shirt clung to him in soaked tatters, and his boots felt heavy with water. "You're awake," a voice said, soft and melodic. He looked up to see her, the woman from the rocks. She stood a few feet away, her long silver hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall. Her eyes, an unearthly shade of aquamarine, locked onto his. She wore a gown of shimmering seafoam green, adorned with pearls and shells, and her pale skin seemed to glow faintly in the morning light. "Who are you?" Dorian asked, his voice hoarse. "My name is Naya," she replied, her voice carrying the same haunting beauty as the song that had drawn him here. "And I'm sorry." "For what?" he asked, forcing himself to his feet. "For bringing you here," she said, her gaze dropping to the sand. Chapter 4. A Love Forbidden. Naya led Dorian to a hidden cove, its waters glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. Strange flowers bloomed along the edges of the lagoon, their petals shimmering like starlight. "This is my prison," Naya said, her voice tinged with sadness. Dorian frowned, brushing his wet hair back from his face. "Prison?" She nodded, her aquamarine eyes meeting his. "I'm a siren. My song binds me to this island and it draws others here, whether I want it to or not." Dorian studied her, his grey eyes narrowing. "You don't look like the monsters they tell stories about." "Not all stories are true," she said with a faint smile. "But my curse is real. The only way to break it is to face the one who bound me here." "Then I'll face them," Dorian said without hesitation. Naya's eyes widened. "You don't understand. The one who cursed me is no mortal. It's a creature of the sea, a beast born of storms and shadows." Dorian adjusted the tattered remains of his shirt, his jaw tightening. "Then I'll fight it. No one deserves to be trapped like this." Chapter 5. The Storm Within. Dorian pressed through the jungle, his boots squelching in the damp earth. His makeshift blade, a jagged piece of wood he'd salvaged from the wreckage, was strapped to his belt. He had patched his shirt with pieces of sailcloth, and though his clothes were in shambles, his resolve was unshaken. Naya's voice echoed faintly in his mind, guiding him. The heart of the island. That's where you'll find it. The air grew heavy, and the jungle seemed alive, its twisted roots and branches reaching for him. Shadows moved at the edge of his vision, but every time he turned, they vanished. He reached a clearing where a pool of water lay, dark and still. The haunting melody of Naya's song echoed faintly, but now it was joined by another, a deep guttural voice that sent chills down his spine. The water rippled, and a massive serpentine creature emerged, its scales glistening like oil, and its yellow eyes glowing with malice. "So," it hissed, "you've come to free the Siren." Dorian stood his ground, his grey eyes locking with the beast's. "I've come to end this curse." Chapter 6. The Siren's Trial. The creature towered over Dorian, its massive body undulating as it circled the pool. Its voice was a low growl, reverberating through the cavern. "You mortals never learn," it said, baring rows of sharp teeth. "She is mine, bound to me by blood and sea. Do you think you can break what I have forged?" Dorian's grip tightened on his makeshift blade. "I've come too far to turn back." The beast roared, lunging at him. Dorian dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. His blade slashed at the creature's flank, but the strike glanced off its oily scales. "You are weak," the beast mocked, its eyes glowing brighter. Naya's voice echoed in his mind. "Dorian, you cannot fight it alone. Use the conch shell. It's hidden in the keeper's shrine." Dorian glanced around the cavern, spotting a pedestal on the far side. The beast followed his gaze and let out a deep laugh. "You'll never reach it." The creature lunged again, and this time Dorian sprinted toward the pedestal. The beast's tail whipped around, knocking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his ribs. "Get up," Naya's voice urged. Gritting his teeth, Dorian rolled to the side as the beast's tail smashed into the ground where he had been. He scrambled to his feet and threw himself at the pedestal. His hands closed around the conch shell, its surface engraved with glowing runes. The beast roared, sensing the artifact's power. Chapter 7. The Call of the Deep. Dorian raised the conch shell to his lips and blew. A deafening otherworldly note echoed through the cavern, shaking the very walls. The beast shrieked, writhing as the sound tore through it. The cavern's dark waters churned violently, and the glowing runes on the conch grew brighter. Naya's voice was clear now, steady and strong. "The shell binds the beast to the sea. Use it to send it back." The beast lashed out, its claws raking the ground as it fought to stay anchored. Dorian blew into the conch again, and the sound grew louder, forcing the creature to retreat toward the pool. "You cannot defeat me!" the beast roared. "I am the sea!" "And I am the storm," Dorian muttered, blowing the conch one final time. The beast let out a final ear-splitting shriek as it was dragged into the dark waters. The pool stilled, its surface reflecting only the faint glow of the conch. Chapter 8. The Lighthouse Keeper's Tale. Dorian collapsed to his knees, the conch slipping from his hands. The cavern was silent now, save for the distant crash of waves. Naya appeared beside him, her silver hair glowing softly in the dim light. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch cool and soothing. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Dorian looked up at her, exhaustion etched into his face. "Is it over?" "Not yet," she said, helping him to his feet. "The curse is tied to the lighthouse. We must finish this there." They made their way to the island's peak, where an ancient lighthouse stood, its crumbling walls covered in seaweed and moss. Inside, they found the skeletal remains of the keeper, a journal clutched in his bony hands. Naya opened the journal, her aquamarine eyes scanning the faded pages. He wrote about the beast. It bound itself to me to protect its heart. The lighthouse's light can sever the connection for good. Chapter 9. Through the Maelstrom. The storm returned as they worked to ignite the lighthouse's ancient flame. Wind and rain battered the tower, and the waves crashed against the cliffs below. Dorian climbed the spiral staircase, carrying the conch shell and a lantern. His boots slipped on the wet stone, but he pushed forward. "Almost there!" Naya called from below, her voice barely audible over the storm. He reached the top, where the lighthouse's massive lens stood dark and lifeless. Placing the lantern in its center, he blew into the conch one final time. The note resonated through the lighthouse, and the flame burst to life, casting a brilliant beam of light across the stormy sea. Below, Naya stood at the base of the tower, her arms outstretched. The light washed over her, and the faint shimmer of her skin began to fade. Chapter 10. A Song Without End. When the storm finally cleared, the island was calm. The lighthouse's light continued to shine, illuminating the ocean for miles. Dorian descended the tower, his body aching but his spirit lighter. He found Naya standing by the shore, her silver hair blowing gently in the breeze. "It's done," she said, turning to face him. "The curse is broken." Dorian studied her, noticing that the glow in her eyes had dimmed. "And you? What happens now?" "I'm free," she said, a faint smile on her lips. "But the ocean is my home. I cannot leave it." Dorian's heart sank. He had come to care for her, but he knew she was tied to the sea in ways he could never understand. She stepped closer, her delicate hand brushing his cheek. "Thank you, Dorian, for everything." Before he could reply, she turned and waded into the water. Her song rose again, soft and mournful, carrying on the wind as she disappeared beneath the waves. Dorian stood on the shore, the lighthouse's light at his back, and watched the horizon. He knew he would never forget her, or the song that had led him to her. Dorian stood resolutely by the sea, the faint echo of Naya's melody lingering in his heart.